Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew, where we are continuing our encounter balancing series. Today we're talking about Tier 2, which are levels 5 through 10. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Alright, so we are continuing the encounters balancing series today. Levels 5 through 10, we're finally getting into some higher level spells. We're getting into multiple attacks per round. We're getting into some more iconic monsters for Dungeons & Dragons. If you want to support the channel, please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you're enjoying the content for this series so far, hit the notification bell so you can be notified the next time that one of these videos comes out. Joshua, get us started when we're talking about encounter balancing for Tier 2.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to kind of go back to some of the basic rules to begin with that are in the DMG that will help you start building up encounters. One, knowing that for a party of like 3 to 5 players, you're looking at about 6 to 8 medium to hard encounters throughout any given day of adventuring for that party. And it also recommends that your encounters should be limited to having about 3 rounds on average. For how long they should last, which for me is helpful as a scale because in our games we typically make our battles last way longer than 3 rounds because of the difficulty we do. So if you want to have fewer encounters throughout the day, you can make them more difficult. But if you want to aim for that, 6 to 8 medium to hard encounters, you're going to want to have enough monsters in there so it only lasts about 3 rounds for the party to be challenged. And I think that's really important to start off with before we start diving into all the things like action economy and those types of things, and just knowing that you have to know kind of what your scale is in regards to preparing these.
Yeah, and I think that that's a situation where you kind of have to decide what's right for you and your group. How many encounters do I want per day? How long do I want the encounters to last? How difficult do I want the encounters to be? And this is something that we talked about in the first video, just in regard to basically saying, do I want to have more difficult, like on that scale of like easy, medium, hard, deadly type situation? Where do I want my encounters to fall? And one of the things that we had talked about was basically saying having a mix, like having some easy encounters, having some hard encounters, and not just falling into here's another generic medium encounter again that does the exact same thing.
Yeah, you're going to want to decide how many of those easy, medium, hard encounters you want. And like you said, we're going to be talking about Tier 2 today, which is like your levels of 5 to 10. So if you're looking at like easy encounters at level 5, this is 250 experience points per character. If you're looking at like in a single encounter, it could be 500 for medium, 750 for a hard, or like 1100 experience for like deadly encounter. And you're going to be picking out monsters in these encounters so that throughout the day you're averaging at about 3,500 experience for your character at 5th level. So that's all the experience that they can gain in a single day. And I know when we played 3.5, we looked at these charts really closely, like trying to like balance this out to kind of ease into the waters of playing this so that we weren't just like overpowering characters or leveling too fast and all these types of things. As time has gone on, we've probably been a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Lax
In that. Yeah, we just kind of like set things up because we know the party and what they can handle, and they're all kind of veteran players, we handle it differently. Or even for myself, I've gotten to a point where I really like just like milestone leveling instead of like keeping track of all the XP. So I don't utilize those charts as much, but it's still important to know what the party can handle in terms of like what monsters you're going to be picking out.
Right. So yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there, but I do want to point out one of the things when you're designing encounters, because there's a couple of pieces here, right? There's the number of encounters per day, there's the difficulty of the encounters that you happen to be choosing. You're talking about XP in regard to those encounters, and that generally, like you said, corresponds to the difficulty of the encounter. So all those things make sense. But when it comes to the actual balance of an encounter, determining if it's hard or medium or easy, XP is not always a good determiner of that, simply because action economy is really coming online in Tier 2, which has a lot more to do with how many attacks do the PCs have, how powerful are their spells, how much damage are they able to put out versus the enemy. So taking a regular CR5 monster and pairing it up against a party of 4 level 5s, you're probably going to be somewhat disappointed. You're going to find that that CR5 is not as powerful as you thought it was going to be, not in the same way that a CR4 against 4 level 4 characters. There becomes this kind of divide that occurs between levels 4 and 5, and it has to do with action economy. Most of the time, your level 5 monsters, your CR5 monsters, are going to be able to make 1 or 2 attacks, and that wasn't a big deal previously, but if you have, let's say you have 4 fighters, the 4 fighters at level 4 could make 4 attacks per round. The 4 fighters at level 5 can make 8 attacks per round, and that's double the amount of effectiveness that party of 4 has. Now, I think a lot of people are looking at that and going, well, but you never have a party of 4 fighters. The equivalent is still true. Your rogue sneak attack has gone up. Your wizards and your clerics and your druids have all gone from level 2 to level 3 spells. And this is kind of true across the board for all the classes. There's this bump that occurs between levels 4 and 5 that really affects how powerful those classes are and what they can do over the course of Tier 2. And you kind of have to pay attention to it. So generally speaking, what I do is my CR5 monsters I rarely put alone. I don't need to do anything crazy, but something just to balance out the action economy a little bit, where I have a CR5 monster and I throw in some CR1 halves or some CR1 quarters to help balance the number of actions that are occurring during an encounter, so that the attention of the party has to be split across multiple enemies, and I generally find that this is more beneficial than trying to balance encounters at this tier.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I also want to make sure that it's understood by the GM that even in that scenario, the game is set up for players to be able to have several encounters throughout the day usually.
Right.
And I think that's really important to know, that you can, throw out a CR5 with some minions and a CR5 and some minions and a CR5 and some minions and still be okay for potentially a larger battle right after that and wrapping it up. Without thinking that, I have to have one battle like that and then end the day and then, go again, necessarily.
Yeah, and this is, again, the same thing we talked about in the previous episode, which is you have to know your party, you have to know their experience. If your party, if you've got wizards in the party and they're real excited because Fireball just came online and they throw they burn out all their 3rd level spells right at the start of their adventuring day, they're no longer a CR5, or they're no longer a level 5 in terms of like what they can provide for the party. They've lost that ability because it's been expended. Obviously, there are some ways for various classes to regain some spell slots and that type of thing, but you just need to pay attention to how knowledgeable or how experienced are my players. Are they going to be able to handle this advanced kind of action economy type thing for Tier 5 or for Tier 2? Take time, allow them to ease into Tier 2 if this is the first time that you're running that. I think 5th edition has been around for long enough, most people have played it enough to where this probably isn't too big of a concern, but just kind of pay attention to easing them into it. Let them get comfortable with the new abilities and the new powers that they have, and remember that this is going to continue to scale all throughout Tier 2. We're starting with 3rd level spells like Fireball. They suddenly have Revivify. They can raise the dead. They have more powerful spells. They're getting level 4 spells at level 7 for the most part. So that means they're going to have access to things like Firewall and more powerful damaging spells and curing spells. And then level 5, you're getting into things like Cloud Kill, Cone of Cold, massive damage spells, and massive abilities at 5th level when they're reaching like level 9 that really kind of change the map once again. So at every 2 levels, there is a huge increase in power, because these are when new spells levels are coming online, and this is really something as a DM you just kind of have to be aware of and pay attention to, because as they gain these, they have the ability to completely eliminate an encounter with a single spell if they use it well.
Now, in that same breath, and I really appreciate you mentioning this, in knowing what your parties are capable of and recognizing that as they expend their abilities and their spells, they start dropping down in terms of the power of their party, because you do have to pay attention I mean, it comes back down to what type of game are you playing? Are you
Right.
wanting to murder your entire party, or are you wanting to like continue it on? So if your party expends everything, you might have to save that next big encounter to the next day, and not be like, well, you guys shouldn't have expended all your spells in the first battle, because now you got to face this, because you're going to wipe the party out in doing that. Because
Yep.
the monsters you start facing at these levels can do what you're talking about in terms of what the party can do with spells.
Right.
We're now looking at young dragons,
Right.
demons, and devils that are lower level that have multiple attacks or effects that can last into the next rounds. Hydras, are here as well. Trolls are here. The giants start coming online.
Mm-hmm.
So you start having much more powerful monsters that can also do potential area effect spells, or they can incapacitate full members of your party, which will again drop them out of the on paper level of what they are. If your wizard gets knocked out in the back because a giant threw a rock and it critical and took them out, your party just went to a CR3 fighting a CR5 monster in one round. And so you have to consider that type of that thing happen.
Well, that was almost the exact example that I was going to pull, which is basically that, the same danger exists in terms of those high damage monsters, like you were talking about, young dragons, devils or demons that come online that are relatively low level, but they still have a very powerful hit. And it's possible to take out that lower hit point wizard that has a 10 or a 12 in their constitution. They probably only have 30, maybe 40 hit points, but when you're talking about an 8d6 rock that comes flying in and gets a critical, and suddenly they're doing a massive amount of damage, it's a huge difference for the way, like, it affects the entire party. It affects their resources. And I think that this is something that you really have to pay attention to as a GM as well, is that how are the resources being expended? And I'm not talking about just the adventuring day, because you have your adventuring day. Let's say that you do 6 encounters during the day. They take their 2 short rests during the day. They have to use a number of their HD because the encounters that day didn't go in their favor. They were particularly hard. The next day, they're only regaining a certain portion of their hit die back to be able to do their short rests. So if you go with that same pace on the next day, the entire group is going to be struggling that much more, because suddenly they can't use the short rests to regain hit points the way they could the day before, because they don't have enough left. Pay attention to day over day and encounter over encounter when you're balancing. And this is where, when we were talking about in the previous video, doing things like waves of monsters or throwaway encounters that are not hard set, so that you can make sure that you're providing something that is fun but still challenging in the right ways.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack with what you said too, but all of it's very true. So everybody rewatch that part of the video, so you don't miss anything there. But the piece that I was thinking of as you were talking about that was in regards to how many monsters you're having face them, and this comes down to that action economy as well. And this is why I like to go back to remembering that these battles should last about 3 rounds on average in what I'm doing. If I end up throwing a whole a small army of giants at my party that are all throwing rocks, the dice are eventually going to roll in my favor for someone to roll a critical.
Right.
And that's where it becomes dangerous. When you start looking at the action economy and the probability of the dice rolling because of that increased action economy. If we're rolling, 20 dice around between myself, my monsters, and the party members, somebody's eventually going to land something that's going to shift the scales of the battle. And so if you think of a smaller scale, especially starting out with newer adventurers, you might want to just throw 1 or 2, creatures at a time, so it's going to last 3 rounds. Those scales aren't going to be tipped as far, and you can start to let the characters get used to their abilities and kind of understand some of the tactics of the terrain or the environment you've set up. All these types of things got to be put into play or kept in mind.
Right. So yeah, the talking about the action economy, talking about the number of monsters, I think is very important. If you think about like 4 ogres, I think have around 50 hit points. So if you have 4 ogres that are facing the party, they have 4 attacks. Together they have 200 hit points. That's a lot of hit points for the party to be able to hack through. Most of the time, if you're talking about somebody with a two-handed weapon, they have a decent strength. They're doing an average of 10 or 12 damage per attack, which means your fighter can do somewhere between 10 and 20 points of damage per round, depending on how many times he's hitting. You're talking about a wizard who's throwing out his cantrips, which now are 2d10 or whatever it happens to be for that particular thing. But as a party, you can expect them to take out one ogre per round, maybe with a little bit extra. So 4 ogres is going to take roughly 3 or 4 rounds of combat for them to eliminate, unless they are all grouped together and the wizard throws out a fireball and he just does 100 points of damage to the group of them. Because 8d6 and it all of the math, I'm not going to go through it here on the video, but basically it averages out to more than 100 points of damage to the entire group of ogres. Suddenly it's changed from a 3 to 4 round encounter to a 1 to 2 round encounter, something like that, depending on the resources they want to expend. But they have expended a fireball. They have expended other resources, and those things are going to affect the way that future encounters are going to be handled by the group.
Yeah, I feel like we're making this really complicated to balance it, but it's more of recognizing what's coming, I think, into each encounter at this level, so you're not overwhelming them. I mean, you don't have to memorize all these things.
Exactly.
It typically figures itself out, but don't play with it into terms of being like, oh, they're level 5 now, they come online, they have these spells, now I'm going to throw waves at them that are just overwhelming, that's going to stomp them into the dirt.
Yeah, it's a combination for me, because we've talked about this before. You're very much a planner when it comes to a lot of things, and I'm very much a pantser. And these are terms where I play by the seat of my pants in a lot of cases, and you'll actually have a dedicated plan for the way you handle things. When it comes to encounters, I very much do both. I have very specific plans for everything that I want to do, but I always am willing to change what my plans are. I don't expect that what I have planned is the way things are going to go. And I think that if you stick really hard and fast to a set of plans when it comes to encounter play, or even D&D in general, you're going to have a bad time. You're basically in a situation where it's like, well, I prepared these 6 encounters. We're going to go through all 6 encounters, but your party is completely like swamped by encounter 4, and you're like, well, it sucks for you. We've got 2 more on the table. It's not going to be fun. You're going to end up with hurt feelings or a party wipe or something else. So, but at the same time, the reverse is true. If they're just mowing through them and you had prepared 6 encounters and you don't have anything else left for the day, sometimes that can feel kind of bad too, because then the party is like, well, this was just kind of a weird day. Like there was nothing that was ever even a challenge. It was kind of boring. So just be prepared to change your expectations and change what you have planned in order to try and make things interesting and engaging.
Yeah, I know that we did our full monster tactics series. We did a lot of different monsters in terms of how they play, and so if there's particular monsters you want us to talk about to add to that series, let us know. But you might check out a lot of good options in terms of how to set up your monsters across the battlefield to be more challenging, to make those encounters more fruitful, or even memorable for the players themselves. Because again, like you're saying, if you have 4 ogres that are in one area, all bottled up to give it the fireball and it kills them all, that's it's exciting in the moment that it happens, but it's not really a challenging play for them. But if you take your monsters and you spread them out across the battlefield, you have them coming in at different waves from different directions, they're using different types of attacks, this can allow you to get the full utility out of those creatures and challenge the players at the same time. And so I think this becomes more important when you're getting to this tier of play and how you're using your tactics or your strategy as the DM and bringing those monsters onto the battlefield. I don't know. That's kind of just my first thoughts. You have to really consider this at this tier more so than the first tier of gameplay.
Yeah, and I think the big thing is vary it. Give the opportunity for the party to be surprised. Give the opportunity for the party to surprise the enemy. Give the opportunity for monsters to come and wave from different directions. Give different allies or players get high ground, enemies get high ground. Vary these things. Make it different. Don't make every single encounter, we open the door, everybody rolls for surprise to see who's excited, or who didn't know the other enemy was on the other side of the door, and then just fight out the battle inside of an empty room. It gets very boring very quick. change those things up, make differences in each encounter, give different ones advantages and disadvantages, and so on and so forth. Your party and your players are going to have a much more entertaining time if all of the encounters feel different, or they have different aspects involved in the way that balance is mitigated.
Yeah, I agree. What else did you want to talk about Tier 2 specifically, John?
I think we're good for Tier 2. We'll save anything else for Tier 3 and Tier 4 as we get into those, but I think that paying attention to things like action economy and action economy at Tier 2 is probably the most important thing to pay attention to coming in here.
All right. Well, thank you guys again for hanging out with us here on Dungeon Brew. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Check out some of our other videos, and we'll see you all again next time.
Dungeon Brew.